Good day, everyone. We will perform a disaster recovery activity by making DR node JBSAG3 as primary replica in an event where database servers JBSAG1 and JBSAG2 goes down. Let's get started. We will look at the environment first. So we have a primary region and then a DR region. So primary region is East US and DR region is Korea Central. We have three database server as part of an always on availability group. JBS AG1 and JBS AG2 is part of an availability group called JBS AG, and JBS AG1 acts as the primary replica and JBS AG2 acts as the secondary replica with synchronous commit, and JBS AG3 is acting as a secondary replica with asynchronous commit. So now the scenario would be like, let's consider the primary region goes down completely. That is the whole of East US, all the database servers goes down. So in this case, what happens is like the always on availability group goes into a resolving state. And what we need to do is like, we will basically have to make JBS AG3, which is in the DR region, Korea Central, primary replica, and once JBS AG1 and JBS AG2 comes online in the primary region East US, what we will have to do is like, we will have to failover back the AG from JBS AG3 to JBS AG1. So let's look at the always on availability group dashboard. So right now JBS AG1 is the primary. So let's look at the dashboard here. So if we see here, JBS AG1 is the primary replica. JBS AG2 and JBS AG3 are the secondary replica. So JBS AG1 and AG2 have an synchronous commit mode with automatic failover, and JBS AG3 is having an availability mode of asynchronous mode. And since it is asynchronous, we have a failover mode of manual. So right now, the scenario would be JBS AG1 and JBS AG2 will go down completely. What we'll do is like, we will shut down these two servers, and then once that goes down, our activity would be to bring JBS AG3 as the primary replica and then fail it over to JBS AG1 when JBS AG1 and AG2 is online. So that's the activity. So right now what we'll do is like, we will look at the quorum settings. So if you look at the cluster manager, so the cluster name is JBSWikiClust. So I'm looking at this particular query, which basically like is going to tell us what is the quorum setting here. Yep. So let's run that. So if you see here, it's a node majority wherein we are giving one vote for all the three nodes. Since this is a demo setup, I've set up with a node majority, but if it is going to be actual production environment, then we need to go for a discussion with the appropriate team, like the platforms team and the high availability team. And what I understand is like, at least if a decision has to be made, since JBS AG3 requires a manual failover, I will not be giving any vote for that. So instead what I'll do is like, I will give one vote to JBS AG1 and then another vote to JBS AG2 server, which are on the primary region. Since the votes needs to be, it's a best practice to have it odd number of votes. What I'll do is like, in addition to the votes for JBS AG1 and JBS AG2, I'll be creating a file share witness or maybe a disk witness and make the votes to total 3. But in this case, since it is a demo, what I'm doing is like, I'm giving one vote for each of these nodes. That way I will have 3 votes. For maintaining the quorum, you need n by 2 plus 1 votes. That is, in our case, we have 3 nodes. That means like we need at least 2 votes for the cluster to be online. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop JBS AG1 and JBS AG2, and we will just have 1 vote, and that way cluster cannot be online. So let's do that and then see what happens. Let's get to the Azure portal, and then what we'll do is like, we will stop JBS AG1 and JBS AG2, and then let's see what happens. I will first stop JBS AG2 and then I will stop JBS AG1. Okay, so I've started the stop operation. Let's wait for it to complete. Okay, so the virtual machines are stopped. So let's refresh the status here, and we can see that status is stopped here as far as JBS AG1 and JBS AG2. So with this, we can confirm that this particular scenario is present now, wherein JBS AG1 and JBS AG2 is down. So let's go ahead and look at the availability group properties. Before that, let me close these two servers. Cool. Let's go to JBS AG3. Let's open the SQL Management Studio. So we are getting an error occurred on the always on dashboard. Let's close it. Let's do a refresh now. Okay, so let's look at the always on availability group on JBS AG3. JBS AG2 and AG1 is down. Let me just disconnect that and then try connecting to maybe AG1. It doesn't connect because AG1 is down, and that is same for AG2 also. So let's look at the always on availability group, and then we can see here. Okay, let's refresh it one more time. Then if you see here, it is basically showing as resolving. Yeah. So we couldn't see any informations here. The database are not there, and AG3 is basically showing as resolving. Now let's look at the cluster manager. Then we can see that it is down. So the cluster status is down. Yep. So there is nothing much we can do here. So what we'll do now is like we'll check the event viewer logs on the application just to make sure like what all we are seeing here. So let's refresh it, and then we can see that there is an error. The local availability replica is in a failed state. The replica failed to read or update the persistent configuration. So it is basically like it is telling like the clustering service is kind of down. Yeah. So we have more information of that sort. Let's go to the system and then see if we have anything interesting there. So yeah, this seems to be an interesting one. Not an interesting one in a production scenario, but this is a lab machine, so kind of interesting. So the cluster service is shutting down because the quorum was lost. So we lost 2 votes out of 3 votes, and that's the reason the quorum is lost. This could be due to loss of network connectivity between some or nodes in the cluster or a failover of the witness disk. So in our case, the 2 nodes are gone. So we lost 2 votes out of 3 votes, and the cluster quorum cannot be formed with just 1 vote. Yeah. So it basically tells you the cluster service encountered an unexpected problem and will be shut down. So now what are we going to do is like we are now going to do a force quorum and then bring it online, and then bring the cluster online, and then we'll basically do a force failover. So let's get started on this. So what we'll do now is like right click on this cluster which is showing as down, and then we have an option to click on force cluster start, or let's consider like you're not able to see this one in the cluster manager. And then what you can do else is like you can run this command net start CLUS SVC, which is basically the cluster service /FQ. So this command basically performs the force quorum. So now you can use this one. This is also an alternative if you are not able to do it from the cluster manager. So right now I will try it from the GUI in the cluster manager. If it doesn't work, that is when I will be trying it from the command prompt. But right now, let's do a force cluster here. So here, are you sure you want to force start this cluster? Yes. Let's do that and then see what happens. Okay, so it completed it seems. Let's do a refresh. I still see this one as down. Let's do a refresh. Let's check the SSMS and then see if there is any changes here. It's still resolving. So what we'll do is like I'm not sure if it could bring it online here from the cluster manager. So what we'll do is like let's try this from the command prompt here. Let's give it maybe 30 more seconds. Yeah, the cluster services was started successfully. Let's verify that. Most of the time it works from the cluster manager GUI. Sometimes it doesn't. So if I see here, the cluster service seems to be running fine. So for me, the command on the command prompt actually did the trick, at least for me. So let's see here. Let's do a refresh again. Okay, so let's look at the SSMS now. Let's look at the always on availability group. Yeah, it is still showing as resolving here. Let's look at the cluster manager. So now it seems like it is online. So if you look at it here, so now everything seems to be down. That's the reason the AG is in resolving mode. But one good thing is like after we did the force quorum, we are able to see that the failover cluster came online. So now it's time for us to do the force failover. So what we'll do is like let's refresh it. So previously we were not able to see the databases inside the availability group. So let's check the availability replicas and the availability database and the listener. We're able to see that. So what we'll do now is like we will do a suspend data movement of this particular database and see what happens. Okay, so now we are able to complete the suspend data movement. So now that the suspend data movement is completed, what we'll do is like let's do a forced failover, because right now the JBS AG1, the previous primary, and JBS AG2, the previous synchronous secondary, both are down, and there is only option to bring this database online in this AG is to perform a force failover. The thing is like we know that it's gonna result in data loss, but there is no other option right now because this is a DR scenario. So I just right click on the AG and then clicked on force failover. Let me do that one more time. Right click and then failover. Click on next. So it is in the availability mode is asynchronous, and then we have a warning stating like it would be failover readiness is data loss. We know that there will be data loss. Yep. So this is something that we need to be worried here. But the thing is like there is no other option. We know that the primary data center, primary region is completely down. So the only option is right now to perform a forced failover with data loss. Let's proceed. Click on next. We need to check this particular checkbox to confirm that we are aware of the potential data loss. Let's click on next, then complete the failover. Okay, so it is basically telling like validating WSFC quorum mode configuration. So this is something that we need to do with the current WSFC cluster quorum is not recommended for availability group. So after this force quorum and then we fail over the AG to the primary region, we will have to set the quorum again. Let's click on close. And then let's refresh the instance again and then see your availability group. So right now this has become the primary. So AG3 is no more resolving, it has become primary. The database is paused, and then we have the listener. Let's try connecting to the listener in the meantime and see if it is working. Okay, it works. I'm able to connect to it. Let's do a simple query, at least select at server name. Yep, it is pointing to JBS AG3. Let's query our database also. So we have a table called table 1. There is no table called table 1. Let's look at what tables we have there. Okay, there seems to be no table created. So what I'll do is like, let me create a table. And then insert close to maybe 10 rows. So right now we don't have any primary, we don't have any secondaries. So let's insert 10 rows and then after we do the failover back to the primary, let's see if it works. Okay, the insert worked. We have 10 rows. Okay, cool. So now what we'll do is like, let's wait for the other two servers to come online. So in this case, what I'm going to do is like, I'm going to manually bring these two servers online. So right now, JBS AG3 is your primary. The applications using your listener will be able to make connections to this database, and then it will be inserting the data. The only thing is that your transaction log will be growing until and unless the primaries, the other two secondaries comes online and then resynchronizes with the current primary, that is your JBS AG3. But it would be kind of a business as usual once we have done the force quorum and then performed the force failover. So what we'll do now is like we will bring up JBS AG1 and also JBS AG2 that is on the East US region. Okay, so let's wait for these two servers to come online and then let's connect to the instance and then see what is the status of the alwayson availability group. Cool. So JBS AG1 and JBS AG2 is online now. So what we'll do is like we will check these two instances now. We'll disconnect the listener. Let's connect to JBS AG1 and see if we are able to connect to it. Yep. Let's do a connection to AG2 also, that is JBS AG2. Yep, they're able to connect to AG2 also. Let's go to the always on availability group for JBS AG1 and go to the availability group. This is showing us secondary. It as soon as it came online, it was able to um, um, basically connect with the current primary, which is your JBS AG3, and was able to understand like JBS AG1, which was previously the primary, has become a secondary, and AG3 has become the primary. So now what we'll do is like we'll pause the data movement here, since we will be like failing over from AG3 to AG1. So let's first pause the data movement in JBS AG1. Let's see if it completes without any errors. Okay, let it happen. In the meantime, let's look at AG2 also. Let's go to always on availability group and then check the status of the database, and then let's suspend the data movement there also. It is secondary. Let's right click and then do a suspend data movement here as well. Okay, so let's wait for updating Object Explorer to complete. So for AG1 it is completed, so it is for AG2 right now. So let's give it maybe like another 30 seconds. I will pause the video for this to complete, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, so it completed. So now what we'll do is like we'll first resume the data movement on the primary, and then we will resume the data movement on each of these secondaries. So let's start with the primary, which is your JBS AG3. Let's wait for this to complete before moving forward. Let me pause the data movement. So let me pause the video, and then okay, it has completed, so that is good. So I will go now on JBS AG1, and then I will resume the data movement there. In case if it fails, then we will have to check this further, like why it has failed. But I think it has completed. So let's wait for the updation of the Object Explorer to complete. In case if it fails, then we will have to check that further, like why it failed. But in our case, it has completed at least for JBS AG1. Okay, so I will pause the. Okay, it has completed here as well. Now let's do that on JBS AG2 as well. So here on the database, right click, resume data movement. Okay, while this is happening, what we'll do is like let's connect to this particular database in JBSAG2 on the secondary database, and then JBSAG1, and then let's see if we are able to see the tables that we have created. So we are seeing this message, which basically tells like the target database JBSWiki is participating in an availability group and is currently not accessible for queries. Either data movement is suspended or the replica is not enabled for read access. So what we'll do is like we will connect to it using an application intent of read only. Click on option. Database is JBSWiki. Go to additional connection parameters. Then use application intent is equal to read only. And let's see if this works. Okay, so there seems to be something else. So what we'll do is like let's go to AG3 again and then look at the availability group dashboard to see if everything is looking okay. Okay, so right now we are able to see that it is synchronizing, but it is having a warning. So let's look at what the warning is. Okay, so now what we'll do is like, since this is showing as asynchronous, let's change that to synchronous for time being, and then see what happens. So that was the message. Basically, I was able to understand with that particular message, like what was going on. It was basically telling like it should be in it should be synchronized. So that's the reason I've changed it to synchronous. Yeah. So now I think after the failover, we can reconfigure the things. But in the meantime, what we'll do is like let's go to JBSAG1. Let's refresh it. It should be synchronized now. Let's refresh JBSAG2 as well. Okay. Now if I look at AG1, it is showing as synchronized. Now let's click on new query window. And same information, either data movement is suspended or availability replica is not enabled for read access. Now what we'll do, we will use an application intent, and then let's try connecting. Okay, instead of connecting from here, what we'll do is let's look at the availability group properties, then check what is the uh, readable secondary properties. It is all set to no, so let's try changing it to S and then see if we can make a connection across. Give me 1 minute. Let's click on OK. Looks good. Let's stop it and then refresh it. All looks good. Now let's try connecting to it. Okay, let's see. Yes, it is connected now. Select star from table 1. Now we are able to see 10 rows. So everything looks good and we are able to access it. Let's try the same thing on JBSAG2 as well and see if we are able to connect to it. Yep, yep, not able to connect. Let's or from table 1. We have 10 rows here, so now everything seems to be good. So what I'm seeing is like we are able to bring online all the servers, and the availability group is working fine. The only change that we have done is like we have made everything asynchronous, and also we have modified the readable secondary property to S. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to failover this AG back to JBSAG1. Let's do that and see if it works. Click on next. It's always better when you're doing the failover, you connect to that particular server and then do it. So it's always advised to do the failover from the secondary. I'm doing that, but I've not logged to JBSAG1. That's the difference. So yeah, there is no data loss, so everything seems good. Let's click on next, and then let's do the failover. Okay, so the failover is completed. So now what we'll do is like, let's look at the always on dashboard on JBSAG1. Okay, so everything seems good, yeah. So I'm able to see that JBSAG1 is primary. All the databases across JBSAG1, JBSAG2, and JBSAG3 is synchronized. There is no data loss. So now we are business as usual, wherein JBSAG1 is primary now. Now let's do the changes back. That is at least for JBSAG3. What we'll do is like we will change the availability mode from synchronous to asynchronous and then click on OK. Yep, let's refresh it and then see if the changes are seen here. All good. So right now JBSAG3 has become asynchronous and it is currently synchronizing. So last step would be to set the quorum. So let's go to more action, configure cluster quorum settings. Let's click on next. Let's go with advanced quorum configuration. Then what we'll do is like for select nodes, we will have vote for all the 3 nodes. Click on next. I don't need a quorum witness, so I'm just going ahead with this. And then I'll set it up. Now what we'll do is like we will check the oaths from the PowerShell and then we will confirm that. So you're able to see 1 vote for each of these nodes. So in this video, we temporarily shut down JBSAG1 and JBSAG2, and AG group went for resolving. Then we were able to see that the cluster services went down on AG3. So we did a force quorum initially with the GUI. It did not kind of brought up the service, so we tried doing it from the command prompt using the force quorum switch, that is /FQ. And after that, we suspended the data movement on AG3, and then we did a force failover. And once that was done, AG1 and AG2 was brought online. We suspended the data movement for that particular database there, and then changed the availability mode for AG3 to synchronous, and then we looked at the availability board, availability group dashboard, and we confirmed everything was okay, and then we failed over back to JBSAG1, and now everything seems to be fine and we are business as usual. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Jai Hind.